They say trust is the foundation of any marriage, but what happens when that trust is shattered? This is the story of the night my life fell apart, and the unexpected path it set me on. I dragged myself through the front door after a long, exhausting day at work, fully expecting to find Alice in the kitchen or lounging on the couch. "Alice?" I called out as I started climbing the stairs. "I'm back." "Be down in a sec, Spartan," she called back from upstairs. Her playful tone brought a tired smile to my face. Spartan was her nickname for me, a running joke from the night we met. It had been at a costume party, where I'd shown up dressed as a Spartan warrior. I'd accidentally bumped into her and quickly apologized, but before I could say more, she'd tapped my chest and grinned. "You're Spartan," she said with mock seriousness. I couldn't help but chuckle and pointed at her chest in return. "And you're Alice," I teased. It wasn't until later in the evening that I learned her actual name was Alice. From that night on, the nickname stuck, and 5 years later, here we were, married, with what I thought was a happy, stable life. Feeling the wear of the day, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and flopped onto the couch. The 6 o'clock news was just starting, the familiar hum of the anchor's voice filling the living room. I was barely a few sips in when I heard Alice descending the stairs. When I turned to look, the bottle nearly slipped from my hand. She was wearing that little black dress, the one that never failed to take my breath away. It stopped mid-thigh, hugging her curves in all the right places, and while the neckline wasn't exactly scandalous, it was definitely enough to make me stare. The open back revealed she wasn't wearing a bra, something the sway of her movements confirmed even before I noticed. To top it all off, she had on the necklace I'd given her just a month ago for our anniversary. The whole look was stunning, effortlessly captivating. Fumbling for my phone, I thought about snapping a picture. I wanted to remember this moment. Alice in that dress, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. I had no idea, though, that this night would change everything. I paused, unsure why I felt the sudden urge to capture this moment. "Wow, didn't know we were still dating," I joked, standing up. "Let me freshen up and change clothes. By the way, where are we headed?" She smirked, adjusting the necklace around her neck. "We're not going anywhere. David Sinclair invited me to dinner and dancing tonight." She grabbed her clutch and added, "I'll probably be late, so don't wait up." David Sinclair. The name hit me like a slap. "The David Sinclair?" I asked, my tone sharp. "The guy who was blacklisted from every company event after, his little habit of pursuing married women." Alice sighed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. He's not like that. David's just an uptight guy with a jealous husband who started all the drama." "Well, here's one jealous husband who's not about to let you go out with him," I shot back, my voice rising. "Alice, this is insane." She stopped at the doorway and turned, her expression cool and distant. "I don't belong to you," she said curtly. "No, you don't," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. "But when we exchanged our vows, we promised to belong to each other. That's what commitment means to me. I thought it meant something to you too." Alice laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that softened the edges. It was dismissive, sharp. "Oh, don't be so old-fashioned," she said, her tone almost mocking. "We're in the 21st century now. Nobody cares about that stuff anymore." The word stung, but what came next was even worse. "It's a shame you didn't tell me earlier," she continued casually, grabbing her coat. "We could have just divorced and moved on." "Divorce?" I echoed, the word feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. "What do you mean?" Alice didn't answer. She just laughed again, that same dismissive chuckle, and headed for the door. My heart was pounding, the room spinning as I watched her walk away. She didn't care about my questions or my anger. I heard the hum of a car pulling into the driveway. A sleek Lexus. My stomach dropped. "Here comes David." Alice called over her shoulder with a grin. Order yourself a pizza or something. The absurdity of the moment hit me all at once, and something inside me snapped. As she stepped outside, I grabbed an old baseball bat from the closet, though I wasn't entirely sure what I planned to do. Alice! I yelled. She turned back, startled by the urgency in my voice. Without thinking, I reached for her dress, tugging at the fabric. It tore in an instant, leaving her standing frozen in the cold night air, clad in nothing but a tight black thong and her high heels. For a brief moment, we both stood still, her stunned, me breathless. Then, reality set in, and Alice bolted back inside the house, slamming the door behind her. I walked toward the Lexus, tapping the bat rhythmically against my palm. The sound of Sinclair's tires screeching as he sped away was oddly satisfying. A glance around confirmed my neighbors were out, taking in the unexpected spectacle on this otherwise quiet evening. I gave them a polite nod, might as well acknowledge the audience, then turned and headed back inside, placing the bat back in the closet where it belonged. Grabbing a fresh beer to replace the one that had gone warm, I sank into the couch. The tension in the air was palpable as I braced myself for the storm that was sure to come. And I didn't have to wait long. Alice came storming downstairs, wrapped in a robe, her face red with fury. The words spilled out of her in a chaotic mix of anger and frustration, punctuated with expletives I didn't even know she knew. I stayed silent, watching her pace as she vented. Finally, when she ran out of steam and the room fell quiet, I leaned forward. "What were you thinking?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "What did you hope to accomplish by doing this?" "I don't know," she shot back, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. "Our lives have gotten so monotonous. We don't have any fun anymore." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. "And why am I only hearing about this now?" I asked. "The last few times I tried to mix things up, you either didn't care, or you told me it was gross." She hesitated, guilt flashing across her face. "I didn't want to lie," she said quietly. "I thought if I told you, it wouldn't count as cheating." Her reasoning hit me like a slap. "That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," I said, my tone sharper now. "Sleeping with someone else without my consent is definitely cheating." Alice looked at me, her anger softening into something that almost resembled hope. "I thought, maybe if I told you, you'd allow it." I stared at her, stunned. The absurdity of her suggestion was almost enough to make me laugh, but all I felt was a rising tide of anger. "You've completely lost your mind," I said, standing up. "I need to get out of here before I do something we'll both regret." Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out, leaving the beer untouched on the table and the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door before Alice could even get up from her seat. The air inside the house was suffocating, and I needed space, fast. So, I did what any self-respecting man in my shoes would do. I headed to my favorite bar, the one place where I could drown my sorrows and maybe make some sense of what just happened. "What's eating you, Michael?" Ben, the bartender and a longtime friend, asked as he slid a cold bottle my way. "You look like someone ran over your dog." "You're not too far off," I muttered, taking a long pull from the beer. Came home tonight to find Alice dressed to kill, announcing she was heading out with David Sinclair from work and that I shouldn't bother waiting up. Ben raised an eyebrow as he wiped down the counter. "David Sinclair? The guy with the reputation? Please tell me you said no." "Of course I said no." I snapped, more at the situation than at him. "What kind of fool do you think I am?" Ben smirked, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Just messing with you, dude. Relax." "So, what happened next?" I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. She hit me with the usual nonsense about how I don't own her and how loyalty is some outdated concept. "Can you believe that?" Ben whistled low, his face twisting into a grimace. I'm guessing you didn't buy it? Not for a second, I said, setting the bottle down with a hard thud. And then, right as I was trying to wrap my head around her nonsense, Sinclair pulls up outside in his fancy car. Alice makes a beeline for the door. That's when I snapped. What did you do? Ben asked, leaning in, his curiosity obvious. I grabbed the bat from the closet, I said, shaking my head at the memory. Followed her outside and, well, let's just say she didn't make it to the car in that little black dress. Tore it clean off her, right there on the street. No way. Ben exclaimed, his eyes widening. Oh, yeah, I said, leaning back in my seat. She froze like a deer in headlights, realizing the whole neighborhood was watching her standing there in nothing but a thong. Then she panicked and bolted back inside. And Sinclair? I walked over to his car, bat still in hand, and gave him a look that said it all. He didn't stick around. Sped off so fast, you'd think he was fleeing a crime scene. Ben shook his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. Sounds like a win for you, man. I sighed, the weight of the night pressing down on me again. If only it felt that way, I said quietly. The victory was short-lived. I was nursing my beer when I heard Alice coming downstairs, her steps heavy and deliberate. She appeared in the living room, arms crossed and her expression sour, like a bear with a thorn in its paw. As she calmed down, her pout gave way to another rant. I didn't respond, letting her words wash over me like background noise. Eventually, I slipped upstairs, changed into my pajamas, and crawled into bed, deliberately turning my back to her when she finally came up. As I started to drift off, I thought I heard the faint sound of her sobbing. For a brief moment, I considered turning around, but I stopped myself. Instead, I shut my eyes and let sleep take me. The next morning, Alice was up early, standing at the stove as the smell of bacon and eggs filled the kitchen. Breakfast was unusually quiet, the tension between us hanging in the air like a storm cloud. We ate in silence, and even as we cleaned up, the uneasy calm lingered. Then, Alice broke it. Michael, she began, her tone a mix of frustration and pleading. Why can't you see that times have changed? No one expects to stay with one person their whole life anymore. I placed the dish I was drying on the counter and turned to face her. I don't think I'm alone in disagreeing with that, I replied. But if that's how you really feel, then maybe we should consider a divorce. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. I don't want a divorce, she said quickly. Well, Alice, I said, keeping my voice steady, you can't have it both ways. If you don't want a divorce, then you need to let go of this nonsense about seeing other men. She dropped her gaze, her fingers twisting a dish towel nervously. I don't want a divorce, she repeated, softer this time. Then it's decided, I said, though the resolve in my words didn't reflect the uncertainty I felt. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild easily. Despite her assurances, I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. Every time she came home late or forgot to call when she said she would, my stomach twisted with unease. The tension between us was undeniable, and it all came to a head at a family gathering a few weeks later. Alice's infidelity had become the elephant in the room, and whispers followed us wherever we went. When one particularly bold relative pressed me about the situation, I didn't hold back. I let the wine flow liberally, hoping to shield Alice from humiliation, but eventually, I had to tell the truth. I pulled out my phone and showed the photo that explained everything. The reaction was swift. Alice's family was outraged, their disapproval raining down on her like a torrential storm. Amid the chaos, she sought me out, her face a picture of regret. Michael, she said softly, her voice trembling. Is there really nothing I can do to change your mind about the divorce? I stroked my chin, pretending to ponder her plea. After a moment, an idea came to me, one I was sure she wouldn't like. Okay, Alice, I said slowly. You want to see other people? Fine. But here's the deal, you'll need to wait until I've had a chance to find someone myself. Alice raised an eyebrow, but I wasn't done. And there's one more condition, I added. What's that? She asked, her tone cautious. You can't start dating until I've gone on at least one date, I said. I'll give myself 2 weeks. If I can't find someone by then, you're free to do whatever you want. For a moment, she stared at me, as if weighing whether this was some kind of trap. Then, to my surprise, her face lit up with one of the brightest smiles I'd seen from her in weeks. Clearly, she was confident I'd fail. Maybe she already had someone in mind and didn't see me as a real obstacle. Whatever the reason, she threw her arms around my neck and kissed me. That's great, Michael, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Her enthusiasm only deepened my resolve. I wasn't going to let her win this easily. By Friday, I left work early, determined to make good on my promise. I booked an appointment at the barbershop, getting a sharp haircut and grooming myself to perfection. Back at home, I snuck into the guest room with my new outfit, determined to make an impression. I shaved, brushed my teeth, and added the finishing touches just as I heard the garage door open. Timing couldn't have been better. When I emerged from the guest room, looking sharp in my fresh clothes, Alice was caught off guard. Her surprise was fleeting, though, as she quickly masked it with indifference. David will be here at 6:30, she said casually, checking her reflection in the mirror. Fine, I replied evenly. I have plans of my own. Her eyebrows rose slightly, intrigued, but she didn't ask any questions. Later that evening, I arrived at the bar ahead of schedule, nursing a drink as I waited. The ice in my glass had nearly melted when she walked in, Isabel. She was a friend from way back, someone I hadn't seen in years but who had always been warm and supportive. Isabel spotted me quickly, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Well, what's got the last Boy Scout of America out of his shell tonight, she teased, flashing me a grin. But her laughter faded as soon as she saw the look on my face. Oh, Michael, she said softly, placing a comforting hand on mine. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to tease you. You look like you've lost your best friend. I turned away, my throat tightening as my eyes began to well up. Isabel, sensing my vulnerability, slipped her arm around my shoulders and gently guided me to a nearby table. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone understood, like I wasn't completely alone in this mess. I don't date married men, Isabel said firmly, her lips curving into a soft smile. And honestly, I barely even flirt with single ones. If the guys at the office thought they had a chance with me, there'd probably be a line around the block. I chuckled at her candor. I'm not just looking for a date, she continued. Like you said, I can see anyone I want. But I really like you, Michael. Maybe it's because you don't always undress me with your eyes, not that you don't sometimes, she added with a playful wink. It'd be weird if you didn't. But you always treat me with respect. When we talk, you actually listen. You support my ideas when others dismiss them. That's rare. Her words hit me harder than I expected, and before I could respond, we were at the car. Isabel was stunning tonight. She was a bit taller than Alice but still shorter than me, her emerald green dress hugging her figure perfectly. It fell just below her knees, but a daring slit on the left side climbed almost to her thigh. Her wavy red hair cascaded down to her waist, and the neckline revealed more cleavage than I'd ever seen Alice show. As I helped Isabel into the car, she stumbled slightly, her heel catching on the curb. For a brief moment, her dress shifted, offering a tantalizing glimpse of her creamy white thigh before she adjusted it, laughing at herself as she flashed me a dazzling smile. Guess I'm not as graceful as I thought, she teased. When we arrived at the restaurant, Alice was already there with David. She spotted us immediately, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to shock. Isabel's elegance had clearly caught her off guard. David, on the other hand, couldn't seem to keep his eyes off Isabel. I didn't bother extending a greeting to him. Instead, I nodded at Alice and focused on helping Isabel into her seat. Alice looked like she was about to make a snide remark but thought better of it, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Dinner started off tense. The air at the table felt heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. David couldn't stop stealing glances at Isabel until Alice finally elbowed him, her irritation evident. As the evening went on, though, Isabel's warmth and charm seemed to lighten the mood. It began to feel like just another night out, almost normal, except for the occasional sparks of tension. After dinner, Isabel and I headed to the dance floor, leaving Alice and David behind. Isabel's laughter was infectious as she guided me through a few clumsy steps. It felt good to let loose, even if just for a little while. But the good mood didn't last long. Alice and David eventually joined us, and it quickly became clear that Alice wasn't dancing for fun, she was performing, trying to draw attention to herself. Their show escalated to the point of embarrassment, and the manager eventually approached them, politely asking them to leave. Alice, red-faced and in tears, stormed back to the table, grabbed her coat, and rushed out with David trailing behind her. "Well, you certainly know how to keep a night interesting," Isabel said with a giggle as we watched them disappear. I could only laugh in agreement as she took my hand, pulling me back to the dance floor. For the rest of the evening, we danced, laughed, and enjoyed the moment, leaving the chaos of Alice and David far behind. When we were finally ready to leave, the night felt lighter somehow, like a new beginning was just within reach. Before we left the restaurant, I approached the manager, an apologetic smile on my face. "I'd like to apologize for our companions," I said, gesturing toward the now vacant seats where Alice and David had Saturday. "It won't happen again." The manager waved it off with a polite nod, and Isabel slipped her arm through mine as we headed back to the car. The night felt surreal, like something out of a movie I hadn't expected to star in. Back at Isabel's place, the evening took a turn I hadn't fully anticipated. We stepped inside, still laughing about the absurdity of the night, but the mood shifted as she leaned against the back of the sofa, her emerald green dress catching the light. Her eyes held a spark of mischief as she gently pulled me toward her. Without a word, she pushed me onto the sofa and straddled my lap, the slit in her dress parting to reveal more of her smooth, pale thigh. My breath caught as she slowly unbuttoned the top of her dress, letting it slide down to her waist, revealing her perfectly sculpted figure. The air between us was electric. Time became meaningless. Every moment with her was filled with intensity, tenderness, and a sense of connection I hadn't felt in years. When it was over, we lay together, her head resting on my chest, a comfortable silence enveloping us. As sleep overtook me, I couldn't help but think about Alice's claim that our intimacy had become monotonous. If anything, tonight had proven it wasn't me who had given up. The next morning, we kept things simple. Isabel and I showered separately, and while she finished getting ready, I made breakfast. When she came into the kitchen and saw the spread, eggs, toast, fresh coffee, she laughed. "Wow, you're not just a gentleman, you're a chef too." We shared breakfast, chatting about light, trivial topics that felt refreshingly free of drama. But as the morning stretched on, reality began to creep back in. I knew it was time to head home and face the aftermath of everything that had happened. When I walked into the house, I found Alice sitting at the kitchen table, her head bowed and her shoulders slumped. Her eyes were red and puffy, and it was clear she'd been crying. The sight of her in such a state caught me off guard. But when she looked up and saw my calm expression, it only seemed to unravel her further. Her tears spilled over as she buried her face in her hands. "Oh, Michael," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "It was terrible. All I could think about was you, and her." She hesitated, her words faltering. "Isabel is so beautiful. I know I can't compete with her." Her raw vulnerability softened something in me. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, taking a slow sip of coffee before replying. "Alice," I said, my tone measured. It was never about competing. This isn't about who's more beautiful or more desirable. It's about trust, and the vows we made. Her tears came harder now, and for the first time in a long while, I saw not the defiant woman who had pushed me away but the person I'd fallen in love with years ago, a flawed, confused individual who didn't seem to know what she wanted. I don't see an evil person in front of me, I continued gently. I see someone who's lost. And right now, I don't know if we can find our way back to each other. Alice's sobs quieted, and she nodded slowly. I just want to be the woman you fell in love with again, she whispered. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a door had opened, just slightly. Whether it would lead to reconciliation or closure, I didn't know. But at least, it was a start. I hope there's a way back for us, Alice said softly, her tear-filled eyes searching mine. The vulnerability in her voice was undeniable, but it only deepened the ache in my chest. I'm going to change and go out for a while, I replied, my tone measured, though my emotions churned beneath the surface. When I get back, we'll talk again. But Alice, please understand, this isn't just about us being together under the same roof. Maybe you should have thought about how much you needed me before all of this. Her face crumpled at my words, but I couldn't bring myself to soften the blow. I turned and left the house, the tension following me like a shadow. The cool evening air did little to ease the storm raging inside me as I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood. Questions swirled in my mind. Could we fix this? Did I even want to? The memories of the past few weeks weighed heavily on my heart, the betrayal too fresh to ignore. After some time, I took a deep breath and trudged back home, unsure of what I was walking into. When I stepped inside, Alice was still sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes filled with cautious hope. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then I shook my head. Her face fell instantly, and I turned away, heading upstairs. Once in my room, I locked the door and collapsed onto the bed, fully dressed. Covering my eyes with my hand, I tried to sort through the chaos in my head. The anger, the hurt, the flicker of love that refused to fade, it all twisted together, leaving me exhausted. I didn't know how long I lay there before a soft knock broke the silence. "Michael," came Alice's voice, barely above a whisper. I didn't respond, my throat too tight to form words. After a second knock, I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall to the guest room. When I was sure she had gone to bed, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Alice's claim that our intimacy had grown stale echoed in my mind. Was she right? Had our sex life truly become mundane, or had she never voiced her dissatisfaction? Did I even want to return to that part of our relationship if this was how she handled problems? Yet, despite my frustration, one thing was clear, I still loved her. And while the pain of her betrayal cut deep, I wasn't ready to give up without a fight. The next morning, I found her back at the kitchen table, looking as if she hadn't slept at all. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she cradled a cup of coffee. When I entered the room, her eyes snapped up to meet mine, filled with uncertainty. "Okay, Alice," I said, breaking the silence. "Let's get something straight." She flinched slightly, clearly bracing herself for more hurt, but I kept my voice calm and even. "If we're going to try to fix this, we're doing it my way." She almost jumped out of her chair, startled by the sudden firmness in my tone. "Michael. I don't want a counselor whose goal is to save our marriage," I continued, cutting her off. "Whether or not this marriage can be saved is beside the point right now. I need honesty, Alice. No hidden agendas, no more lies." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Slowly, she nodded, her gaze flickering with a fragile glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I could tell Alice was disappointed, even though we had both agreed to part ways. Her betrayal lingered between us like a shadow, and while I tried not to let it dominate our interactions, the damage was too great to repair. On her end, she couldn't get past her insecurities about Isabel, despite my repeated reassurances. I told her that while I cared for Isabel, I wasn't in love with her and that our date had been a reaction to the situation, not a pursuit of something serious. But Alice couldn't accept that. In the end, we decided it was best to separate. The divorce was finalized quietly, without drama. Afterward, I took some time to reflect on my life. I didn't rush to contact Isabel. Instead, I booked a stay at a cabin in the mountains, needing space to sort out my thoughts. When I finally met with Isabel again, she greeted me with her usual warmth, but there was a subtle tension in the air. We sat together, talking about what had happened and where we stood now. After a moment of silence, she offered a small smile and said, "Get your mind out of the gutter. I'm not just talking about sleep, you pervert." I laughed despite myself, but her tone quickly grew serious. "I really like you, Michael," she admitted. "And I know I could easily fall in love with you. But I'm worried it might be unfair to both of us. Your divorce is still fresh, and I think we need some time. Maybe we both see other people for a while, just until we're sure this is what we really want." Her words stung, though I knew she was right. She didn't ask me to wait for her, and I didn't promise that I would. Still, part of me wished she'd been less practical, less cautious. We got out of bed, showered, and went our separate ways, but as I closed the door behind me, it felt heavier than I'd expected, like a prison door slamming shut. For the rest of the week, I questioned my sanity. Had I made the worst mistake of my life by letting Alice go? Was Isabel slipping through my fingers, too? By Friday, the weight of my thoughts had grown too much, so I decided to join some friends for dinner and drinks. We gathered at a cozy restaurant, tucked into a corner booth at the back, with me facing the door. The conversation and laughter helped ease some of the tension I'd been carrying. Just as we were finishing dessert, the door swung open, and I saw her. Isabel. She looked radiant, her auburn hair catching the light as she walked in, her laughter bright and effortless. But she wasn't alone. A tall, strikingly handsome man was with her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back as they approached the hostess. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to look away, but the sight of them burned into my memory. Who was I kidding? Of course, he was tall and handsome. Isabel was the kind of woman who attracted attention wherever she went. And now, it seemed, she'd moved on, just as she'd said she would. I tried to focus on my friends, but their voices faded into the background. My thoughts spiraled. Was this what she meant by seeing other people? Had I let her slip through my fingers for good? I raised my glass to take a sip, but my hand trembled slightly. The night suddenly felt unbearably long. I was torn about whether to approach Isabel at the restaurant, but in the end, I decided against it. Respecting her space felt like the right call, even if it stung to sit there and watch her with someone else. Instead, I focused on moving forward. It wasn't long before I arranged a date for the following Friday. Her name was Heather Price, a secretary for one of my clients. We'd shared some playful, flirtatious exchanges in the past, and when I mentioned my divorce, she readily agreed to meet. Heather had always been attractive in a polished, professional way, but when she opened her door that evening, I was taken aback by how stunning she looked. "I think I'm pretty well prepared," she said with a smile, gesturing to her sleek outfit. "That's an understatement," I replied, unable to hide my admiration. As we talked, Heather's candor surprised me. "I know you're just starting to put yourself out there, Michael. I'm not expecting anything serious. I'm open to wherever this goes," she said with reassuring honesty. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. "I appreciate your understanding." With the initial awkwardness behind us, we had a pleasant evening. We ended the night with a warm kiss and agreed to meet again the following Saturday. In the meantime, Isabel and I had plans for dinner. I was nervous about how it would go, but when she arrived, she looked as beautiful as ever in a striking red dress. Conversation flowed easily, though it took a more serious turn when she leaned in and spoke softly. "Michael, about the other night," she began, "I had dinner with someone. It wasn't anything serious, but I wanted to be upfront about it." I shook my head. "No need to apologize. If anything, it was all in my head," I admitted. "Seeing you with him made me realize I needed to stop hesitating. It gave me the push to finally ask someone out." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Oh. Should I be jealous?" she asked, her tone playful but curious. I chuckled. "I wouldn't worry about it. We've got another date planned for tomorrow night. But there's no commitment, just two people enjoying each other's company." Her smile faltered slightly, though she quickly recovered. "That's good, Michael," she said. "I hope it works out." As the evening drew to a close, she reached out, placing a hand on mine. "Please stay in touch," she said softly. "I will," I assured her, standing to leave. "Good night, Isabel." My date with Heather went even better than the first. Our goodbye kiss was more passionate this time, and things became heated, though we stopped before it went too far. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other a few more times. The physical chemistry was there, but something felt off. Despite the fun, the spark I had hoped for never truly materialized. After one of our evenings together, Heather sat beside me, her expression thoughtful. "Michael," she began, hesitating for a moment. "I think this should be the last time we see each other like this." "What?" I asked, startled. "I thought we were fine." "Maybe too fine," she said, her words both cryptic and final. "We agreed on no commitment, and I feel like we're crossing into territory I'm not ready for." Her honesty stung, but I couldn't argue with her reasoning. "That makes sense," I said, though my heart ached. I kissed her forehead, murmuring a soft goodbye, before heading out the door. The following weeks blurred together as I started casually dating other women. Some were brief, little more than fleeting distractions. Others lingered longer, but none felt like the right match. I even saw Heather a few more times, and while we ended up in bed again, the emotional connection just wasn't there. After our third night together, she broke things off for good, leaving me to face the truth I had been avoiding. Living alone again brought clarity, though it wasn't without its share of doubt. I spent countless nights questioning my choices and wondering if I had let the right person slip away. Isabel remained in my thoughts, though our conversations dwindled to sporadic calls. Deep down, I knew that continuing to reach for her would only lead to more heartache, for both of us. For now, all I could do was focus on rebuilding myself and seeing where life would take me next. Most of my dating experiences after the divorce were fleeting. Some were one-night stands, others short-lived relationships that never turned into anything meaningful. The constant cycle left me feeling empty, as if I were chasing something I couldn't quite define. Eventually, it hit me, what I was truly missing wasn't casual companionship, but a deeper connection. That realization led me to pick up the phone. "Hello." Isabel's voice came through, calm and familiar. "Isabel, it's Michael," I said, completely forgetting that her caller ID would have already told her that. "Look, I don't know where your head is these days, but I can't keep doing this endless rebound thing. My life's been like a pinball machine, up and down, all over the place, and I'm tired of it. I want something real. If you're still open to it, I'd like to try again, with you." There was a pause on her end, long enough for my nerves to kick in. "Michael," she finally said, her voice steady, "I'm open to it. Let's take this one step at a time." Months passed, and Isabel and I steadily built a relationship that felt more solid and fulfilling than anything I'd known in years. When we decided to get married, it wasn't an extravagant affair, just an intimate gathering of close friends and family. To my surprise, Alice, who had maintained a casual friendship with Isabel, sent a thoughtful gift. She and Isabel occasionally met for coffee or shopping trips. It didn't bother me, though it was certainly unusual. About 6 months into our marriage, I came home one evening to find Isabel dressed to the nines, her hair and makeup flawless. My stomach tightened instinctively. Here we go again, I thought, half expecting a repeat of my experiences with Alice. But Isabel quickly put my worries to rest. "Go get changed," she said with a smile. "We're meeting Alice at Olivia's for dinner." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "You know, I still think it's a little strange how close you two have become," I admitted, heading upstairs to change. When we arrived at the restaurant, Alice greeted us warmly. "Michael, you look great," she said with an easy smile. "Thanks, Alice." "You look good too," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. The tension between us had long since eased, though I couldn't deny the occasional awkwardness. We were seated at a cozy table, with Alice to my right and Isabel opposite her. As we settled in, Isabel paused to speak with the man at the counter, handing him something I couldn't quite see. "What's that all about?" I asked when she returned. "Don't worry about it, honey," she said with a cryptic smile. Every husband knows that when his wife says nothing, it usually means something. But as curious as I was, I decided to let it go for now. The evening was pleasant, the conversation easy, and the past felt far enough behind us to enjoy the moment. Toward the end of the evening, Isabel and I decided to head home, leaving Alice and her new boyfriend, Ethan, to continue their night at the restaurant bar. Ethan seemed like a good guy, kind, attentive, and steady in a way Alice hadn't experienced before. Isabel and I rarely saw them as a couple but kept cordial relationships when we crossed paths in group settings. From what I could tell, their relationship was stable, and Alice no longer seemed to feel the need to spice things up. As Isabel and I walked to the car, she slipped her hand into mine. "They look happy," she said, her voice soft. "They do," I agreed. "And so do we." Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. As we drove home, I realized that the past didn't define us. It shaped us, sure, but what mattered most was the present we were building together.